Hey, fight fans, Dr. Don Four here. I'll talk to you about your research project for this term. Research is critical to being a good graduate student, and being able to conduct good graduate research will make you successful, of course, in the MBA program, but more importantly in life at your workplace. So you think about your research project as something you might do for the workplace, and us designing a model that will help you be successful in researching issues that you come across every day in your workplace. So kick back, relax, and let's talk about research this term. Okay, what you need to think about right away and is you've got to start with your research topic. Now, you can research your workplace, you can research another company. We've asked this term that you look at emotional intelligence, job satisfaction, or work family conflict. And all that's explained in the instructions. And that's designed so that we can give you the survey you might need to deliver your measurable outcomes and sort of help guide you through the research with something that you're familiar with. So you need to be aware of the variables that you decide you want to study. They'll be critical for literature review. You need to start thinking about research questions. Most research questions are designed from something curiosity in the workplace. I don't believe the morale is good in this organization. I can't put my finger on it, but I think there's something going on. Well, that's the basis of a nice study. And you can study morale in your organization. Along with that, once you come up with your research questions, you have to turn them into something measurable. We call that a hypothesis. And then proposal format is typically your first three chapters. And for our purposes, that'll go real fast, and then we'll jump right into analysis and your conclusion. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about. Those are most important right away, and I'm sure more will come to us as we go through this presentation. So this is what a typical research thesis looks like. You start out by identifying the problem or the issue. Like I said, you've got something going on in the workplace that you're curious about. I wonder if my leaders and followers get along okay, and I wonder how that affects job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So those are things that you might come up with your problem or issue statement. From that, you would devise a purpose, a scope, and then you would come up with research questions or a question. It depends on the framework you choose. And from that research question or questions, you would form a hypothesis. And then it would be testable. So you'd go into the literature review. Best way I can explain the literature review is kind of like that old contingency file. If I told you tomorrow that you're responsible for the company conference this year, training conference, all of a sudden you would have massive things you would have to think about. You would have to come up with transportation, food, hotel. It goes on and on, the things you'd have to do. Now, the way you might do that is start from scratch and just reinvent each and every one of these things. But the best way to do that would be to find the person that did it last year, get that little book they had, and start there. Use some of the things that you like that they did and improve on things that they didn't. So that's kind of like a literature review. You're looking at studies to see who's looked at your problem or issue and what results have they obtained. We'll talk more about that. And then you select the methodology. How are you going to test your issue? And it needs to be in line with the hypothesis you come up with in chapter one. And then you run the data and you analyze it and you come up with conclusions and recommend future action. And of course, you have to stick with APA and do your references, etc. And so there's a lot of APA issues you always have to deal with. This is the format that we're going to follow for our course. You start out with the problem statement, overview of the problem or issue, purpose, scope, research question or questions, hypothesis or hypotheses, and the variables that you plan to study. And then chapter two is an extensive literature review on your topic. And then the methodology, describe everything that you're going to do to measure your hypothesis. Don't assume that the reader knows anything. And then chapter four, you conduct your analysis, post your findings, and then in chapter five, you define your conclusion. What did you come up with? What does this research mean to you? And then everything must be in APA style. So that's what the format of our paper is going to look like. There's two types of research. There's primary research where you form the data your own. If you run your own survey on your own control group, you're going to have primary research. You put it together, you design the framework, and you know the origin of what's in that research. That's primary. A lot of you might use secondary research, data from a source that you may obtain data, and or someone else's information. So that's secondary. If you didn't do it yourself, it's secondary. Identifying the problem or issues, chapter one. This requires a minimum paper of 15, your research paper. You have to have topics for consideration. Like we said, those are three that you have to do: emotional intelligence, job satisfaction, family work, and work-family conflict. We're not trying to be kindergarten about this, but these are areas that we can provide to survey, and that it's something that you'll be, it helps you understand what graduate research happens to be. And then um, again, the suggested outline for chapter one. And what should the problem statement include? The background or problem or issue, any other pertinent information that helps in the analysis, any assumptions you might have, and any restrictions you might have. Purpose and scope, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but the purpose scope needs to be there. What's the purpose of this research? What's the scope? What are you going to cover in this research? Um, Here's an example of a research question. How does technological acceptance affect employee attitudes toward job satisfaction? And another one might be, how does technological acceptance affect employee attitudes toward organizational commitment? These are decent examples, not perfect, but decent. Some possible hypothesis might be leader-member exchange is related to job satisfaction, leader-member exchange is related to org commitment, and job satisfaction is related to org commitment. All these are measurable. They don't say, it's not a long sentence, but it tells you uh, a lot that you need to know about what you're going to research and how you're going to measure it. Here's another one, another example. An individual's acceptance of technological change is positively related to their satisfaction with the job. Again, not perfect, but good. You know, your hypothesis can be as elaborate as you want to make it, or it can be very simple and plain. Okay, something that you might consider is chart or figures. Um, this here explains. It's kind of a conceptual diagram, but it explains the acceptance of technological change and perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, relates to behavioral intention, and that relates to the use behavior. And so a lot of times a picture is worth 1,000 words. So consider that as you're writing your paper. Here's another good example of basically how I would post in my paper my research questions and hypothesis. To what extent does job satisfaction affect retention among employees in small corporate organizations? At least 80% of employees who have worked for the company for more than 10 years are more satisfied than those who have worked for less than 5 years. Very specific, so you can get as elaborate as you want to, and this is very measurable, 80%, at least 80%. Okay, and this tells you a lot more. So the more detailed your hypothesis, the better the hypothesis is. You have variables, you have your dependent variables, your independent variables, you have moderating variables like things that might affect the other two. And if you look at independent variables are the presumed cause, dependent variables are the presumed effect. You can only have one dependent variable, but you can measure that against multiple independent or moderate variables. And so we'll talk about that a lot as we go through the course. Prior research or literature review. The literature review is as I said earlier, a study of research that has where someone else has looked at what you're planning to research. You want to see if they found the answer, and you don't have to go through with your work. Probably won't happen because they probably used a different control group, different setting, different time frame. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any of these sections because we're going to have individual lectures on each one. And again, a conceptual framework is great. Pictures worth 1,000 words. You'll see a lot of the literature that you're reviewing now uses a conceptual framework. Okay, this is a literature review example. You're reading the research and you're citing in your own words, never, ever, ever cut and paste what that paper says and how it pertains to your research. Always best to find the best literature. This is from Acceptance of Technological Change and the area of innovation. And these are theorists in the area, researchers in the area, that other people are citing often, and that's usually an indicator that people believe what they say, and they found some of the best literature out there. So then the methodology. You want to describe everything you're going to do in your research. Don't assume the reader knows anything, but you want a good methodology. You want to talk about how you're going to measure your data, and there's some examples here. Um, you're going to know, this is another table that could be brought in, how they plan to measure the construct or variable. A lot of times you'll see variables and construct interchangeable. So if you see the word construct, they're talking about your variables. But these two variables, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, are measured in various ways. And this table explains it so that the reader knows exactly what you're planning to do. Uh, you want to look at all the analysis. You want to decide on some kind of a statistical package. We're going to keep it relatively simple for this course, and we're going to stick with some demographics and descriptive statistics, but we will do as much analysis as we have time to do. And then you come up with your suggestions for future research, and of course your references. You want to cite your references as you go. So there's absolutely nothing as useless as doing something with great efficiency that does not need to be done at all. Peter Drucker. I think that's a good statement to end this. Let's come out and let me take just a second to show you a quick example. Again, everything has to be an APA, and if you look at our example, and this example is posted, you'll be able to see what your title page should look like, your cover page, and then the table of contents is very important. Um, your abstract is the next thing you should be looking at. Um, and so you need an abstract for your work. And then you're going to jump into the meat of your paper. So this is the introduction, and it's an APA format, so keep a good close look on this. If you follow the example, you'll be 80% of the way there. You'll just need to really double check your um, references and your in-text citations. The most mistakes are made on in-text citations. You need, and remember this as you're reading your articles and citing, you need page numbers and paragraphs whenever possible. And so it's hard to go back and get that. So if you go down through, he talks about there's the research questions, and this is the, and then you look at the literature review. And I always like to start with a nice lead-in paragraph, and then you measure you talk about your variables. Here's literature on job satisfaction. Locke defined job satisfaction, blah, blah, blah. Um, a theory according to House and Wigdors suggests this. Herzberg indicated this. You're talking about your variables, okay? So you use page 387. Um, and then you go through job satisfaction and retention. So you want to make sure job satisfaction in small corporations, and then a small paragraph for conclusion. And then the methodology. Again, I love, it's not mandatory, but it's really a good touch to have a quick lead-in paragraph to explain where you're going, and then go into the statement of problem. This particular example restates the hypothesis. You can do that if you want to. You don't have to do that, and questions. And then you go into the methodology. Population sample description, data collection process, data analysis process, as much detail as you know as to what you're doing in your paper. And then the data analysis and results, chapter 4. And you need your tables, you need charts, everything needs to be in APA format. And you need to make sure that you explain these. Don't just put them up there. You got to explain what they say, okay? And here's where they tested their hypothesis. So this is a good example of your paper. This is a quick paragraph to end the chapter. And then discuss your conclusion. What did you find, and what did you learn from this research? What are the limitations of the study? quick summary of findings and recommendations for future research, and then make sure you have everything in APA reference-wise. So that's uh, that's what's important. Hopefully this helps you, but I'll be with you every step of the way, and I plan to work with you. You're welcome to email me or call me at any time. And this is Dr. Don Ford saying thank you very much.